Hey everyone, this is Car Ray Rob, where I'm Ray.
And I'm Rob, and we want to welcome you to our new podcast, A Copy of a Copy.
A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy. A copy of a copy.
Yes, Rob, you said it. This is our new podcast. This is episode 1 of A Copy of a Copy. And so, since this concept is brand new, why don't you tell everybody what we're trying to do here?
Absolutely. For this brand new third podcast for the Car Ray Rob Podcast Network. We are workaholics, aren't we?
Apparently so. I never thought I was, but I guess I am.
As Ray said, this is a copy of a copy, and what we are going to be doing is Ray and I are going to be analyzing originals and remakes.
2 movies in one podcast.
2 movies. It's going to be twice the fun. For the third show,
Or twice the hell.
Or twice the hell, exactly. We don't necessarily know. And that's going to be one of the things about this show. So as we said, we are doing originals and remakes, but the maybe the slight difference will be, and this is going to vary from episode to episode, is that Ray may have not seen one or the other. I may not have seen one or the other. Maybe we've seen both. Maybe we've only seen one. It's going to be kind of different. We're not necessarily always going to know what we're walking into.
Yeah, no criteria on our exposure
None
to
whatsoever.
the movie, so it's going to be different every time.
Exactly. Just 2 movies, one original, one a remake, and kind of dissect that and see how that goes. I know there's a lot of opinions about remakes.
Yeah, and I'm excited to explore that because I think we have our opinions too on if they're needed, why are they made, what do they offer.
Absolutely. And I know that, as I said, there are a lot of people that are kind of down on remakes, and I can understand why. They can feel like a cash-in. As you said, they can feel unnecessary. But sometimes I like to look at it kind of like a stage play, where, it's like a different cast doing a different production at a different time. I think, and that a lot of times that could be great. It can bring something new, and I think sometimes that is how remakes are. But that does not mean they're inherently good or bad. It is definitely a case-by-case basis, and that is what we are going to be doing here on A Copy of a Copy.
Yes, Robin, it is necessary, I think, now that we tell the audience what movie we're starting this podcast with. Copy of a Copy, episode 1 is going to be about the invasion of the body snatchers.
Exactly. I think this is going to be an interesting one. One, because I have seen both.
I've seen none.
And you have seen none.
Neither.
So this is going to kind of end up being a little bit of a say hello episode in a way, since you haven't seen them. So we're going to be getting not only your initial reactions to each movie individually, like how they are, but also, as remakes.
Yeah, but you don't have to get upset if I don't like them, though.
Exactly. Oh no, and that's kind of how the show will be at times.
Yeah.
There might be a remake that at one point that is a movie I don't like. However, this is not that episode. I love both of these movies. So as Ray said, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We will be watching the 1956 version starring Kevin McCarthy, directed by Don Siegel, and we will also be watching the 1978 version starring Donald Sutherland. Which this is the original and the remake both. This is a concept that is very political in nature. Mm-hmm. And I think the interesting thing about these 2 movies is how each one is centered on a different period of time, but there are certain similarities to the core story.
Universal theme.
Right, the universal theme of the core story, exactly, where it's like these people that are no longer who they are, and they've become this kind of emotionless being, kind of hive mind.
Yeah,
situation.
That's me after 9 p.m. So we want to make sure we keep this podcast moving crisply.
Exactly. We're going to do our best to try to do that, but it is 2 movies, so it is going to be maybe a little bit slightly difficult. But as I mentioned, just kind of the base plot for both movies are they take place one in a small town in California for the original, in San Francisco in the second one.
Okay.
And there are, in both instances, there is a doctor, civil servant type character who is kind of a part of a situation where there seems to be a growing mass hysteria, where people start saying, "Oh, my husband's not my husband. My husband's not my son." And then there's.
I hope your husband's not your son.
Right. Well, exactly. Did I say that?
Yes.
I misspoke. I'm sorry. My son is not my son. My husband is not my husband. My wife is not my wife. Whoever is not my whoever. There it is. But it's so there's that growing paranoia, if you will, and there's some belief and disbelief, and there are, since I've seen both and you haven't, like, I'm not going to spoil much in this before section, but there's just, like I said, there's a belief and disbelief, and both of these stories, they kind of have to, as the suspicions grow and the conspiracy, if you will, grows, the suspense and the thrilling nature of each one kind of take over. So
you kind of said how sometimes copies of copies, remakes, can be direct remakes, like they're remaking the same movie almost beat for beat.
Sure.
Sometimes remakes are completely different.
Yep.
So where would this fall? This kind of sounds like the way you're describing it.
There's a lot of similarities.
It's a copy.
Yeah, there is a lot of similarities between these two, and you'll see as we go into it. And and I think and I will say, as I've said before, people are kind of down on remakes. It's it's not an uncommon thing to say, but we're kind of starting out on a high point, because the 1978 version is actually kind of widely considered to be one of the best remakes ever.
Okay.
So we're kind of getting, we're not jumping into the deep end here, like something that's like
we're setting the bar high. Actually.
Right, we're setting the bar pretty high here. So like I said, I enjoy both of these movies immensely. I think you will as well, but more importantly, I think we're going to really be able to dive in to the themes of both movies, and the necessity of this particular remake in the time that it was made.
Well, let's do that then. And this is usually the part of the podcast where we're going to kind of take a little break. We're going to go watch these movies, and we're going to come back and talk about them. We want to invite you as the audience, if you guys haven't checked out Invasion of the Body Snatchers, either one, pause the podcast. Go do that.
Check them both out.
Yeah, when you're done watching them, come back to us, unpause the podcast, and listen to what we got to say.
Ray and Rob are currently watching the film. Wait, films? There are two? How long is this supposed to take? I've got places to be, Ray and Rob will be right back when they're done watching the film.
All right, guys, we are back. Thank you, Rob, for, since I had not seen these movies, I had to come in fresh. You picked two movies that weren't too long. I appreciate that, a little extra effort you put in there for me.
Right? The 1956 one is just, it is
crisp.
Tight. It is a tight 80 minutes.
Yes.
Just bam, you're in, you're out. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am.
Yep, we are. Just like a little body snatcher. We do not take long.
Right.
We don't meddle around.
No, it's very much, and that's kind of the interesting thing about both these movies, is they're very much of their era.
Oh,
that
definitely.
Way. Like, so 56, I should say, is definitely a product of the studio system.
Yeah.
Where it's like we're getting these movies out, we gotta get butts in the seats. It's, this kind of science fiction, nuclear atomic age science fiction type stuff. Like, it's short, it's to the point, but it's still pretty heady, even for being only 80 minutes.
Yep, I liked what it did there. I kind of like the quaintness of it. We'll talk about that. But, that's one thing I think for this back half of this podcast that we want to make sure we kind of, we don't ramble for 4 hours talking about two hour movies. This could be a long one. So you kind of, I know we kind of talked about segmenting this a little bit more than some of our other podcasts.
Sure.
And so I think a good place to start this combo would be a kind of a question we asked early on, when we were talking about why sequels or remakes are made, and that's, is there a reason why it was made?
Sure.
And I think that's an interesting place to start this conversation. So, in your opinion, and I have mine, and they're probably pretty closely aligned, but, was this a cash grab, or was there a real reason to make this copy of a copy?
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. Yeah, cash grab, I will say, is maybe more common with remakes, but not with this one.
No, I don't think so either.
I would not say that's what this is in any way, shape, or form. I think just like with 56 and 78, I think they're both born of a political turmoil that fuels the need for this story.
Yeah, and it's funny because I definitely think like though they're sharing themes, they're definitely of their own time.
Yes.
You know, it's not like 78 doesn't feel dated because it's trying to do something that was only relevant in the 50s.
No.
It's still relevant then. You could probably make a remake
I was
of the
going to
movie
say,
now.
you could probably make a real movie of it right now and get a third remake.
Yeah, and it would feel of the time.
Definitely.
Or there definitely would be a way to do that.
Yeah.
So.
You know, and as we said, you know, it's because they are of their time. You know, you kind of get this. There's still those stylistic similar, or there's stylistic differences that, like I said, kind of anchor it into when they were made. So, as I mentioned earlier, being the Invasion of the Body Snatchers 56 was made while the studio system was still active.
Definitely.
You feel that in the movie. A lot of sets. You can tell that it was a quick shoot. You know, I got to shoot this in, you know, a week. You know what I mean, or whatever. Right. And you got to. I need 2 reels and, you know, whatever. And it's, you know, so again, 80 minutes crisp. Get it. You want to, you know, you probably put it as a double feature. You know, sure. So it's that kind of thing. You know, you 2 80-minute movies or whatever. That's kind of what the studio is thinking. And then with 78, it's really that, you know, the birth of art house. Yeah. You know, in the 70s. And I feel like even though you can make, you know, the argument that Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a bit of that, you know, kind of like popcorn pulp, if you will. Yeah. It's still, you feel 70s filmmaking throughout that movie.
I agree. Now, you know, we kind of said, you know, how these movies are, you know, their political themes were relevant in 56 and in 78. Why don't we expand a little bit upon what we think the movies were saying and how they kind of relate to each other in those ways?
Definitely. Let's do it.
So this, you know, obviously when you become snatched, when your body becomes snatched by this like alien flower, I guess. I can't remember in 55 right now if it's as explained as thoroughly as it is in 78.
They have the pods. They're not so much the flowers. The flowers was a 78 convention.
And it wasn't like, there wasn't like an alien force behind it. It was just, it was like this kind of like, I guess, it reminded me a lot of The Last of Us right now, you know, like where it's like a fungi is controlling you, or like this plant,
right, almost like a natural thing
controlling you. But they don't explain it too much in 78. They expand upon it more in 78. We'll talk about that later. But yeah, so when your body becomes snatched, you kind of lose your humanity. You're alive, right? You have all your memories, but you don't really have a quest for love or desires or anything. You become a very muted version of yourself,
right? Yeah, and obviously, you know, it's interesting to read kind of the thematic commentaries on this movie, because I see it both as people kind of saying it is a condemnation of McCarthyism, the kind of the paranoia of McCarthyism. Sure. And I also see it as a condemnation of anti-capital kind of communist systems as well. You know, so it's like they try to have it both ways.
Well, depending on the side, if you like the movie, depending on the side of the fence you're on, you kind of made it fit your opinion.
Definitely. And to me personally, I've always bought in more to the condemnation of McCarthyism, where it's like you start seeing these people differently than who they are or whatever. And it's almost not a parody of it, but, you know, a satire, if you will, of that. And I think in 78, it's kind of that same core value, but it's born out of the anti-Vietnam War, kind of post-Vietnam War, I should say, more to the point, era of America, where you're kind of seeing that birth of hyper-capital. So, you know, Reagan in 80, obviously this came out before then, but it was a ramp up to that. You know what I mean? Hyper-commercial, or commercialization, if you will, things like that. And I've seen certain people hypothesize that this movie, 78 version, is in some ways a condemnation of that.
Yeah. I mean, we know Donald Sutherland was very outspoken during those times. You know, I think, you know, obviously with movies like MASH and stuff, also, you know, commenting on, you know, post-Vietnam War types, you know, themes that the country was dealing with. Right. And I think that there's a lot to this, like, just fall in line. just kind of do what you're told, obviously.
Exactly, conformity. Yeah, the kind of end of the counterculture, if you will, like of the 60s.
Yeah, and so the movie's heavy-handed there. And I don't mean heavy-handed as a dig or anything like that, but then the movie's also dealing with I think at one point in at least in 55 they kind of say when they're talking about how you can't be loved or be loved, the way one of the psychiatrists, I can't remember if his name was Kibner in the original as well.
I can look it up real fast. I've got the cast list right here. It is Dan.
Just Dr. Dan?
Dan Kaufman.
Okay, Kaufman. So they did change his name.
They did.
But he talked about how you see humanity drain away day by day, and I think that's kind of what it's talking about. And another thing it's kind of just riffing off of is as you kind of get older, it's that falling in line, it's that conformity. You get less and less individualism,
right?
And you just kind of become what society wants you to become, and you just kind of fit that square peg in the round hole and make it work type deal.
Yeah.
Where the heroes of these movies are fighting against that as best they can to keep that individualism as long as they can, and they struggle to do so.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's where you can kind of see maybe, especially in 55 or 56 more than you can in 78, where you can make that maybe argument that it's, anti-McCarthyism or anti-communist, depending on, which side of the fence, because there is that idea of conformity.
Right.
And, who are you conforming with?
Yeah.
I think it's less ambiguous in 78. I think it's, more cut and dry, like I said, and maybe that's just because of the era.
All right, Rob. Well, let's start really thinking about these movies now. I think that the next kind of question we kind of had when we're talking about this podcast, and we want to concisely compare these two movies a little bit, and I think it naturally lends itself to talking about what are the improvements and what are the detractions.
Right.
Where did the sequel succeed, and where did the original succeed more? Where did the sequel fail?
Yeah.
So. What's let me ask you, what's maybe the first thing that pops in your brain or that you'd want to talk about when you talk about either an improvement or a detraction?
Sure. Well, and for me, I saw them in, I guess, if you want, chronological order. So I saw 55 first before I saw 78.
That's
so
how I watched them. So.
Right. So I have a soft spot for 56. I keep saying 55. Yeah. It's 56. And just because it's the first one I saw.
Sure.
But I do think it does do a few things really well, where it, like I said, it is concise, it moves quick, it wastes no time, for the most part. But there are certain elements of that where that's maybe you could make an argument that it isn't, because they kind of treat it a little bit more of a mystery.
Right.
Whereas 78 kind of jumps right in, this is happening, and you're dealing with it, as opposed to figuring out what is happening.
And I appreciate that about 78, because 55 spends about half the movie, maybe longer, about this mystery about what's going on in the town.
Right.
And my only problem with that, none of it's bad, but the movie is called Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Sure.
So within 3 minutes, you know what's going on because the title told you.
Right.
So it's what are we mucking around for, trying to figure out this thing that you spoiled for me with the name of the movie? You could have named the movie something else. Pleasantville is kind of a similar idea.
Oh, sure.
But you weren't going to get it ruined by the title of the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Yeah, and I think probably what helped 78 kind of nail that down a little bit better than 56 is the idea that it's happening to your main character. So Elizabeth, it is happening to Elizabeth through Jeffrey.
In 78. Yeah.
Right, in 78. Whereas in 56, Miles and Becky are kind of hearing it secondhand. He's coming back, he's called back from a trip early because there's a series of emergencies. So he's kind of seeing it through that, where it's Wilma doesn't think her dad or uncle.
Her uncle.
Is him. And you've got the kid who doesn't think his parents and his mom is his mom.
Right.
And that kind of thing. So he's almost in that Leonard Nimoy kind of situation.
Right.
In the second, he's I've been hearing about this for a week. You know, that's where Miles ends up. As soon as he gets in the town in 56, he's hearing it from everybody else. So in 78, Elizabeth is the one who's feeling this, and she's the one who's trying to get everybody to believe her.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that, for me, helps you kind of get bought in a little bit faster.
Yeah.
And makes it less of a mystery, which is fine, ultimately. Because like you said, it is the title of the movie.
Right. Yeah, it is. And we get to actually see what's happening. Because, like, even when they, in 55... the lead character Miles goes and investigates and talks to Wilma's uncle, but we don't see any of it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like we don't know like what are these people acting like? How are they different? We're just kind of being told like, no, that's still him. And obviously, again, since we know the title of the movie, we know his body's been snatched. I kind of want to see what how is he reacting? And but they don't show us that, and they kind of keep us in the dark there. Yeah. Probably on purpose.
There is a lot of tell not show in that in 56.
And I think that is of the time a little.
Yeah, I mean. It again, because they probably they probably wanted to keep it to 80 minutes. They didn't want to go any longer, and that was so. Yeah, there was definitely stuff that they had to get through quickly, and it was just a convention of the time.
This is a very small thing, and it annoys probably just me, and it makes the podcast harder. But it's like I think it's funny when we talk about again why did they make a remake or why they do make certain choices. Changing the lead character's name. Like, kind of is maddening to me. Like, his name is Miles in the original, and they change it to Matt. Like, there's a studio guy saying, like, Miles isn't a cool name anymore. Like, we need something cooler. Like, how about Matt? It still starts with an M. Guys are going to know it's the lead character. Like, that. There was a roundtable discussion about changing the name. Like, just keep it Miles. Keep them both Becky. Like, right. I don't get the random name changes for characters that are pretty much identical to their counterpart.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I get that. I don't know.
I just think it's funny that they think about that and they like waste, I don't know, brain power doing that. And it doesn't add to the movie at all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in their minds it's just like, oh, this is going to make it its own thing.
Sure.
Like, but Jack and Jack are the same.
Right.
So you get, but it's funny because obviously the casts are very different visually, and a lot of that has to do with the casting choices made, and obviously in 56 and 78. So, you got Jack in the original movie, who's kind of your straight-laced, button-up kind of guy, whereas in 78 it's Jeff Goldblum, which is amazing.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff Goldblum of every era is pretty outstanding. But
you can't
really
go wrong.
young Jeff Goldblum is very weird to me to see. It's still it still throws me for a loop every time I see him.
But I think it's another absolute telling, or showing of the difference in the eras.
Sure.
Like Kevin McCarthy, who is fantastic in 56 and in 78.
Greatest use of I'm not joking. That is the greatest use of a cameo I've ever seen.
He's been running since 1956, trying to tell people this is happening, and he finally finds somebody, and he gets hit by a car.
In case you haven't really checked, the ending of 56 is him screaming, they're after you next. Yeah. You're next. Like, really on the nose, like, so looking into the camera. And then as he jumps into 78, he runs by Donald Sutherland's car saying, they're after you. Right. You're next.
You want to know what's really
never
funny?
Stopped.
In 56, that was not the original ending. In fact, the whole, like, telling as a flashback thing of, like, him in the beginning in the office, none of that was in the original cut of the movie. They added
the movie
all that
been even
later.
Shorter.
Yeah, they all added that later. So, like, it was... And I'm glad they did, because it's so good in 56 when you get that eye contact with Kevin McCarthy. It's so
what was the ending
powerful.
of the movie?
I guess just I'm not even 100% sure. I don't even know, because I've never seen it. I know that was not the original movie.
Well, they improved upon it.
Yeah. But so you've got Kevin McCarthy, who is kind of this. I'm not going to say he's like Mr. Machismo of this 50s, you know what I mean? Quintessential 50s leading man, but he definitely embodies that, I think, to a certain degree.
I think he embodies it. The relationship with him is it kind of feels very old-timey movie relationship.
Definitely. But then you get Donald Sutherland in 78. Yeah. So this kind of like gangly, tall, weird guy with, crazy hair, and it's it's completely
wants people
different.
To eat rat poop.
Right. Well, he doesn't want people to eat rat poop.
Well, he wants the chef to eat it.
Well, sure. But he, just visually, it just shows how Hollywood had broken away from the convention of the 50s.
That's true.
So you kind of get those very stark, different.
And that would be a detraction to me.
How do you mean?
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I was going to say, how do you mean?
No, yeah.
Go on.
Why do you say that?
Go on.
No, I was joking. So.
Fair enough.
Another improvement to me was the science. Like, I like that they could actually expand on that.
Yeah.
55, the science was wonky. Like,
sure.
they didn't really explain the body snatcher stuff as well as they could. Like, they never explained what happened to your body.
Right.
Once it was snatched or how it was snatched. Like, once you start learning that these pods are making copies of your body, you then you kind of realize, through Jack, we find this body that looks like Jack, and it's looking more and more like Jack as time goes by. So like, obviously this is going to become Jack's duplicate or Jack's imposter, but then they don't ever say what's going to happen to Jack.
Yeah.
And then in the mine scene at the very end, which is like a very crucial scene when the Miles, the lead character, leaves Becky. She falls asleep, which you can't do. Like, when you fall asleep, that's when they're going to get you. That's when you're going to get snatched, essentially. And so she does fall asleep, and then she turns into the duplicate without no use of the pod, no use of the created whatever, the extra body. Like, she just became infected, or whatever, however you want to think about it. And I was tossed by that a little bit. I'm like, that's not how this is supposed to work. The science isn't sciencing right now to me.
Sure.
But they fixed on all of that.
Yeah, in 78. Yeah.
They kind of show that your body crumbles away at one point, when I think it happens to Liz in the movie.
Yeah.
So the love interest in both movies, turns, essentially. Yeah. They expand on the flower and kind of how this was spread, that it comes from space earlier. We learned that earlier. Like you said, we're thrown into it way more.
Yeah. The title sequence shows you how it is coming to Earth.
Exactly. It's not a secret. The movie is called Invasion of the Body Snatchers, so let's see the invasion a little bit.
Yeah.
I think I really liked how when Jack was originally turning into his duplicate or his imposter, like when his eyes were closed, the duplicate could open its eyes, or when he opened his eyes, the duplicate had to close his. So they couldn't exist at the same time. That was very interesting, and I wondered if that was going to be in play in the 56 version. Like, could the duplicate be around with the regular host or not? So they kind of answered that and said they just improved upon the science. They were able to take advantage of special effects.
Yeah, but you say that, and I don't disagree. But I think the effects in 56 were great with the greenhouse, with the multiple pods in the greenhouse. Yeah, I mean, the way they popped open and they had the copies come out. Like, I thought that was really great.
Yeah, no, they did a really good job of that, I think. But just technology was improved.
Sure.
I thought this scene the birthing scene of the four bodies in 78 when Donald Sutherland
is sleeping in the backyard.
Sleeping in the backyard, and they're obviously puppet animatronic things. They're slimy. They're you're hearing them try to get their first breaths and trying to become alive.
Definitely.
I thought that was very good.
Absolutely. I'm definitely not saying that 56 is better than 78, but I don't want to shortchange 56.
Yeah.
I thought they did a pretty darn good job with that.
Yeah, and I don't think for one to be good, the other has to be bad. I don't think that in some movies that will be the case, but I don't think that's the case in this. I think both of these movies are pretty well done.
Yeah.
Like I said, I just think I love how they improved upon the science, because everything that I thought was wonky after I finished watching 55, I didn't feel that way about 78, and I can almost now project it onto 55 and be maybe in 55 Becky's body deteriorated and there was a pod right by her. You know, I could almost project that science onto 55 and kind of clear up those loopholes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another interesting thing about this pair of remakes, and it's not always like this, is they really do hit very similar beats. Yeah. Throughout the movie. Now, granted, they gave themselves an extra 35 minutes with 78.
I felt it a little bit,
but they have the same. There are many of the same beats that happen in just different versions.
The structure is the same.
The structure is almost identical, which is super interesting, because that, like I said, that's not necessarily always the case. There's certain scenes that even share lines,
right? Which
I thought was pretty cool. In fact, one of my favorite line reads in both 56 and 78 is when they find Jack's duplicate, and they bring in Miles / Matt into both scenarios, and in both scenarios they're like, "How tall are you, Jack?" Jack's 5'10". "How much do you weigh?" 140 pounds. Like just the read
Yeah.
on both is just it's just like dun dun dun.
That's how big
It's
the duplicate looks.
Yeah, exactly. So I really appreciated that, but you know, I I will give it credit too, because even though it hits those, you know, similar beats, similar scenes, you know, throughout in both movies, it doesn't feel just like a ripoff.
No, it doesn't. Like you said, the structure is the same, but I didn't feel like I was watching the same movie back to back.
Right.
You know, like obviously they're a remake of each other, but it didn't feel like I'm like, oh, okay, this is just, you know, this is just everything's a shot for shot remake. No,
Right,
this
no.
is, you know, they expanded on the story in a lot of ways. They put them in. They put, like you already mentioned, they have the main characters attack the story from a different point of view, where
Right.
they're much more in it.
Right.
Which again, improvement. So yeah, I thought that was strong.
Yeah. And the way they kind of use, you know, some of the other characters. So like in Teddy in the first in 56, you know, once they kind of split off Teddy and Jack, and obviously Jack comes back in the same scene, which there's that same scene
Pretty
in
much, yeah.
78 where Jack comes in with Kibner, played by Leonard Nimoy, which is a pretty awesome,
Yeah.
you know, replacing the Dan Kaufman character from 56. In that one, you get to see Nancy.
Right.
After that scene, like after they escape, they run into Nancy.
She's surviving.
And it becomes right, and it's funny because she's the one you kind of in the movie with.
Yep.
Because of Matt ultimately succumbing, just like Liz, to
Yeah.
becoming a pod person.
Yeah.
So she gets the last scream as opposed to, you know, Kevin McCarthy yelling at you at the camera.
Yeah, I was gonna say we mentioned 55 ending, like you just said, we're getting screamed at, but in 78 you kind of don't know what happened to Matt. Like,
Right.
he's lost everybody. Everybody's been turned.
Mhm.
He's gotten away, and then you kind of just see him walking around. I'm like, you just did all this evasion, and your first thing you do is go back to work.
Right.
But then you can kind of see he's playing like, you know, like Nancy told him, if you just act emotionless, they won't know that you haven't been turned.
Right.
So then you catch on, oh, that's what he's doing, and maybe he's using this opportunity to check in on
Yeah.
Liz and see if she's okay.
Right.
But then the twist.
Yeah. Nope. He is a pod person.
He's been
too
pod
now.
personed. He's been duplicated, so it's
Exactly.
not him.
Yeah.
So that was a cool ending, different. You know, that's probably it's probably what happened to Miles in the first one, but we never see it get there.
Yeah. You know, I think both movies obviously do a great job with the paranoia element of it. You know, I think they allow it to simmer a little bit more in 78. Again, they allow themselves the time to do it. Cinematography was in a different spot in 78 than it was in 56, so I think some of that stuff really
On
lends
locale
well
is
to
different
it.
too.
Yeah, for sure. Not that you can, obviously, you know,
Right.
Hitchcock was making absolutely terrifying suspense movies in the 50s, so
Yeah.
there's no, you know, obviously it could be done, but you know that this kind of, as I said earlier, this kind of like almost like popcorn pulp, you know, atomic age science fiction movies, not necessarily the same bag, so
Yeah.
it's shot a little different, made a little different. In 78, that line blurs a little bit more, so they can kind of allow that kind of thing to be a little bit more artful than they would have in 56.
Was there anything that you thought was maybe, again, we're not saying one's bad or one's good. You know, there's varying degrees of good, I think, in both in situations. But something you thought 55 did better, other than maybe just the pacing. I don't know, but
Oof, yeah, that is hard. I mean, something that 55 did right off the bat better.
I'll
Oh, go
start
ahead, yeah.
then and give you
Okay,
a
go
second.
ahead,
'Cause
yeah.
one thing I do like is I think the setting. I like that it's in a small town and they
Yeah.
all kind of knew each other,
I can get behind that.
especially since the leads, like we mentioned, weren't involved, directly into the story. I think when you were in San Francisco, because that was one of the first thoughts that came to my mind. I was like, how are they going to know if people are possessed in San Francisco? They don't know anybody.
Right.
But then again, the movie was smart in 78's movie and interjected the leads into the drama right away.
Right.
But I like this. I don't know. There was something about the 55, the quaintness, the small town. It's not just this random person is turning into an alien. It's my friend, my neighbor, like the person
Yeah.
I have cookouts with. You know,
Sure.
the whole town knew each other type deal, and so it was cool. You kind of saw the impact on how it affected the restaurant. Like, there's nobody going to restaurants anymore. Like,
Yeah.
It's affecting local businesses slowly. Like I kind of
Right.
liked that part of it.
Yeah, no, I can completely agree with that. And it the funny thing is the reason that I couldn't come up with something right off my head about 56 compared to 78. What did 56 do better? Is because I feel like I like them both equally.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah.
Like I if I I have a soft spot for 56 as I mentioned earlier, so my heart is with 56 in that regard. But I still think 78, you know, as they kind of as I mentioned in the before section, like I think you could make an argument this is one of the best remakes
Yeah.
ever because they were able to really just improve without sullying the legacy of the original 1956 version.
I agree. I think I think I like 56 a little bit more. Like I said, I think there's a ton of improvements in 78. Everything, and maybe that's why I still feel like I like 56 is because everything I had a problem with they fixed in 78 anyway.
Right.
So I don't know, but maybe just the quaintness of 55, like I said, the small town feel, the pacing just being a hair crisper or faster, however you want to think about it. Maybe I just like it a hair more, but I do like them both.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not trying to poo-poo 78 at all, but I think maybe I just like 55. It's funny. I think 78's a better movie, but I think I like 55 more. Does that make sense?
No, I get where you're coming from. I think, like I said, I think part of that is time, which, can be a double-edged sword. I think it sounds like
Sure.
you thought that 78 maybe dragged a little bit.
I thought the third act dragged. Like I like the opening acts more, and I thought the third act was like a lot of like chase, take a break, don't fall asleep, get chase, take a break, don't fall chase. Like I was like, all right, let's get to how are you going to wrap this up?
Yeah. No, I can understand that. But, I think there's some of the additions I thought were really good, like when Elizabeth was tracking Jeffrey kind of around the city and everything. Like I thought that was really good, kind of helped build that paranoia, again. And build on the conspiracy and kind of see how big it is. Because that's the other thing, too, that kind of the opposite of, since the first one did kind of take place in a small town, how do you make something in a city so big feel that big? You know what I mean? And I think impactful, maybe is the better word. A conspiracy like this, how do you make it impactful? And I think that was something that, they did pretty well in 78 to kind of encompass that big of a city.
Yeah, I think, naturally, I think as a movie watcher, I kind of feel like, oh, the protagonists are going to win. They're going to stop the body snatchers from winning.
Right.
But in 78, they really do a good job of making it kind of like, like this is probably already out of hand. Like there's not really a good avenue to escape here.
Yeah.
We're in 55, I kind of thought they were going to keep finding a way to win, but no, you never do.
Yeah.
You can't stop the body snatchers. It's the one thing I've learned for sure.
Yeah. And I it is what it is. I think the cast obviously is overall better in 78
probably
than in 56.
They're expanded upon more too.
Yeah, they're expanded before. It's also a cast of characters that I'm a little bit more familiar with.
Sure.
And that's, I think, one thing that's maybe fair, unfair, call it what you will, excuse me. But it's hard to beat Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum, Veronica Cartwright, Veronica Cartwright, Leonard Nimoy, Brooke Adams. I mean, all of these actors and actresses were just, absolutely knocking it out of the park, and they're great in everything. You see them in multiple things. They're great in multiple things. So it's kind of that jump from that studio system style of acting to this, the artfulness of the 70s. And so it's maybe unfair to say one's better than the other. What do you think? What do you think?
I agree. That it's like they're brothers. So
Sure.
It's kind of like saying like, well, don't say one brother's better than the other.
Right.
But like I said, I might like 55 just a hair more. But I think they're both good. So I wouldn't say, tell somebody, well, watch 55. Don't even bother with 78. Like it's not that. It's not that kind of relationship with either movie. So it's going to be personal preference, I think, on which one you like more. And it might be you think they're tied, like you kind of mentioned. Like, yeah, I think they're both. They're different enough, doing the same thing, but they're different enough where I like them both the same.
Sure. Well, I mean, to be fair, 78 had a dog with a human face on it, so that
Sure.
really like came out of left field.
Yeah, I did. I was actually taking a note during that time. I had to rewind. Like, what just happened?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was a good convention, since in 56 they had to get Liz to show emotion, and then
Right.
in 78 they needed something. And it's like, well, this is 1978. This isn't 1956. How are we going to do it? Oh, well, let's have a dog with a human face. Because again, it kind of goes into that scientific element of it that they had kind of shown earlier, where it was the homeless guy and his dog were both being
Right.
taken over, which is interesting. You're like, and take over the animals.
They missed
too?
that one.
Yeah.
The pod just messed
But
up.
just it is like, put them together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, as we kind of wrap up this
Yeah.
conversation about 1956 and 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I don't know if I could sit here and necessarily say, hey, Ray, which one did you like better?
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't. I don't know if we should go that route.
Maybe some
some.
movies we can, but
Yeah.
I don't think we need to on this one. They're both good. Watch
Yeah.
them both.
Yeah, exactly. But let's get some final thoughts going. Obviously, I think since we both love it, I think it's kind of maybe written on the wall already. But was this movie needed?
Yeah. Well, I think we could maybe like a sequel, but still feel like, nah, you could have just left it at one. I don't think that, the sequel's good, but didn't really bring anything to the table. Where, I don't think that happens here. I think the studio got it right. Like, I think, them deciding it was time, what was it, 22 years later? Yeah, 22 years later to make a remake of that. Kind of where we were at that time as a country, or, politically and stuff like that, that it was going to fit, that it was going to, maybe put a different lens on an old wound or whatever.
Sure.
I thought it was a good decision, and I thought that, like I said, they improved upon it. They didn't just do a shot for shot and take it the lazy way out. They found a movie that was fitting of the times, and they made it fit the time. So, I think this. I don't know if we'll say this a lot, but I think the studio got it right here with this remake. It was a good choice. What about you?
Yeah, no, I can completely agree. Like I said, I love 55 because it was the one I saw first, so I'm with you in that regard. But I do also really love 78, and I think you kind of hit it on the nail on the head. There is a universality to this story that I think you can kind of move it into a lot of different eras.
Right.
And like as you kind of alluded to earlier in the podcast, I think you can make this movie right now. I think there's definitely a lot of people out there that are like, man, I knew
agree.
this person and I don't feel like I know them. They are not who they are anymore. So
Yeah.
I don't. So yes, if all of a sudden I started seeing news, on various movie websites that they were getting ready to make another Invasion of the Body Snatchers remake, I might be like, yeah, I get that.
Okay.
I get that. I might check that out. But yeah, and I think it being two different eras, I think definitely helps.
Yeah.
I think now sometimes remakes are made closer together than maybe they should.
That's true.
So I think,
Or they period piece it and put it back in the original timeline.
which you're like, why? Yeah, why? So I think this did a great job. And again, there was I think a very significant event between these two movies that also made it feel very different. And like I said, that's the destruction of the studio system.
Yeah, because the 70s don't feel like the 50s.
Right.
The 2016s and the 2020s, if you're making a movie now,
Right.
feel
Even
the
if you're
same.
making like
Yeah.
02,
Right.
2002, and you're making it in 2020 or
It's like,
22, it's like, okay.
It's not that stark difference of the 50s,
right.
wear a tie everywhere and a jacket, to the 70s.
Exactly,
Where
and I know
don't
we'll
wear
be
a shirt at
exploring
all.
other movies that will be in this exact same boat, where there will be pre-studio system destruction movies plus 70s 80s kind of remakes that kind of do something completely different. So that's not uncommon, and we will definitely explore more of those on this podcast. Well, that's it. We have finished our first episode of A Copy of a Copy. We watched Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Ray, did you have fun?
I did. I was worried it was going to be really hard. 2 movies was scary, just to find the time to get it done. But luckily, we started off on a good foot. You got me hooked because you picked 2 good movies.
Yeah, I made it easy for us this
You did.
first
I
time.
appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? There's going to be a lot of different movies on my list because I'm not going to lie, I've got some remakes I don't even like.
I think we need to explore the ones that we don't like and question why the studio did this to us. Why did they subject us to this movie?
Exactly. And sometimes, you know what? You might revisit something. Maybe you like it better this time. But I don't know. We'll have to
We've
see.
noticed that in some of our other podcasts, so hopefully that'll be the case.
That
Hopefully we
will.
thought we saw a remake, it was horrible, and we come back and we like it.
Absolutely. But you will now have Car Ray Rob every Monday of the month.
Yes, because we're going to do Copy of a Copy on the second Monday. We're right
Absolutely.
in between our 2 Say Hellos. We had an open spot, and we're throwing a Copy of a Copy in there.
Exactly. We're a glutton for punishment, so we decided we're going to have one show every week, and we can't wait for you to join us for each and every one.
Yeah, it's what you guys need to do. There's another thing they need to do, though, Rob.
We always got to do it.
This
we
is how we have to close
we got
the
to
show.
close every show.
You have to like the podcast. That helps us out a lot. You got to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode every week that we're going to be providing you. Leave us a 5-star review if you can. If you do, we're going to read it live on air no matter what it says someday. And you can also get in contact with me and Rob. You can email us at carrayrob@gmail.com, or you can talk right at us on Blue Sky.
Absolutely. If there is a comment section on whatever platform you are on, we would love to hear your thoughts about Invasion of the Body Snatchers, either 56 or 78. Which one do you like better? Do you not like either one? We want to know about it.
Tell us.
Absolutely. If there's any other great remakes that you could think of, by all means, let us know. We don't know everything about movies. We just know a lot, but we might miss something. We're always looking for something great to watch.
Absolutely.
We will be back next week.
Yes, we
next
will.
Week. We're going to be saying this every time now.
Yeah,
next
that's
week with the next episode of Say Hello to My Little Film, and it will be back to Ray.
And I've got a good one.
Oh, well, he always says that, and it's 50% true.
That's true.
But you're not going to miss it either way. So until then, this is Car Ray Rob.
Where I'm Ray.
And I'm Rob. And remember, be defined by the films you love, not the ones you hate.
A copy of a copy. 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 A copy of